for a Saturday morning. So thank you very much. This one's going to be as interactive as possible. So if you do have any questions, stick them in the Q&A button, which you should have at the bottom of the screen. It's slightly different to the normal Zoom meetings. Normally it's not there. So check that out. Stick a question in there and we will try and get through as many as we can.
Thanks, Libby. Over to me.
Yep.
Right, morning, everyone. I'm going to introduce Geoff before handing over to Geoff. So I did ask his permission to use this photo of him. Geoff knew beards were cool years ago. He knew he was ahead of the game in terms of beards. But I thought it was quite topical because my life at present with my little lad is Panini. My little lad's got, I would suggest, thousands of Panini cards. It's cost me thousands of pounds, probably, or hundreds of pounds. And I do actually remember Geoff, among others, as a Panini sticker, because that was what you did then. I think, like a lot of you on the call, you knew every single player in the top division because of the Panini book. So I found that. I first met Geoff when I think I was 20 or 21, and I was at Peterborough United, and I was the under-9s manager, and we were put on a UEFA B course at the club. I'm assuming, Geoff, you were with the PFA then. I would think if you went into the football club.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and there was a good group. I had a great time. I learned so much, and it's funny how you take so many things from different people. It's only since I've been sort of inviting people like Geoff along to webinars. Actually, that's where I got that from. So I remember coaching a mock session, and we were doing finishing, and I think Luke Hobbs or someone skied it, and I said, "Oh, unlucky," and Geoff just said, "It wasn't unlucky. It was awful technique. Go and coach it." I thought, okay. And that stuck with me forever, Geoff, because I think he's right. It wasn't unlucky. It's so blasé to say unlucky. So I still like to say that to people now. I said, no, I wasn't unlucky. And that's where I got it from. The UEFA B, I loved it, but we all met on the morning. I don't know if Geoff knows this, but he will do in a minute. We met on the morning of the final assessment at McDonald's in Highbury, which is near the training ground. And we had our breakfasts and this, that, and the other. And then everyone drove to the training ground, and I drove home. I just couldn't face the final assessment. I just lost my bottle, and it took me 9 or 10 years to practice and experience to then go back and do my B license with Nigel Quincy, who is possibly gone today. So I often think if I just got through that day, and where would I be now? Maybe manager of England. You never know. I then met Geoff again on the A license a few years ago, 2013, and he was a massive influence for me. He was the one that made sense of it all. The A license content's quite heavy, and but as soon as Geoff got on the pitch and started showing it in practice, it clicked for me. And I've taken a lot from Geoff as a coach and also as a tutor. So Geoff doesn't preach, he doesn't tell, he just challenges all the time. He gets you wrestling with things in your mind, and I'd like to think that's my approach when I'm in the classroom and on the pitch. So a long introduction, but I thought it was worth saying. Morning, Geoff. Can you tell us a little bit about your journey from when you stopped playing to what you do now?
Morning, Steve. Morning, Abby. Morning, everybody. Thanks for joining, and thanks for that story, Stephen. You know, when I think about that course at Peterborough many years ago with John Malling on there and Dan Ashworth on the course at the time, I'm sure it was that course. There's a lot of things, a lot of water under the bridge since then. But going back to your question, I played a long time at West Ham, as you know, and then moved to Notts County for a couple of years and come back to London, to Leyton Orient. And I was a player there for a couple of years, and John Gorman was the youth team coach at the time. And towards the end of the second season that I was there, I picked up an injury that was either going to, I would need an operation for, or was going to basically retire at 35. And at that moment in time, John Gorman went to Swindon as first team coach with Glenn Hoddle. Mm-hmm. And Frank Clark, who I would class as a close friend and a very nice friend to have, called me in his office and said, what's happening with you? So I said, well, I think I'm probably going to retire. He said, would you want the youth coach's job? So I said, well, yes, please. No qualifications whatsoever. Went and got my, what was the prelim at that particular time. There was no B license or no intermediary course, and then straight onto the A license. So I picked up the two coaching qualifications at that particular time, and then lost my job. Peter Eustace came in as first team coach at Orient. Frank went back to Nottingham Forest, which was his dream job because he really that was where he was synonymous with. And Peter came to me one day and said, at the end of the season, he said, we're not going to renew your contract. I said, oh, why is that, Peter? He said, well, we feel you haven't produced a player. So I said, oh, thanks. I said, in 2 years, I haven't produced a player. So he said, yeah. He said, well, I said, how comes that 75% of the players that have been in my youth team have played in your first team then? And he couldn't answer the question. So he wanted to get me out, whatever happened. And that was a poor excuse at that particular time. But 2 weeks later, I get a phone call from Alex Welsh at London FA. And he said, what are you doing? So I said, well, not a lot at the moment. He said, do you want to deliver a prelim for me? So I went, all right then, okay. So no training whatsoever, racked up on the course, did a prelim course for the first time as a coach educator, and finished the course. And Alex said to me, before you tell anybody whether they've, because in them days, Steve, as you might remember, you got a letter through the post whether you achieved the qualification or not. You wasn't told in person. And Alex called me and he said, how many's passed? I said, well, this amount. He went, no. I went, what do you mean no? He said, no. He said, that's too many. He said, you can't have that many pass. So it was very difficult then to actually, you know, and I argued quite vociferously that shouldn't be the case. You know, they've got to, if they are good enough, then they should achieve the qualification. And I suppose when you talk about the things that you're talking about, how things influence you, that's been one of the major influences on me. You know, it's not about a quota of people that achieve the qualification, and it should never be that way. It's about whether you're good enough to achieve the qualification, irrelevant of who you are, where you've been, what you've done. And I've lived by that for most of my coach education career. So that was the first time I delivered a prelim course, and then I got a job in a college, East Berkshire College over in Slough, and with a friend of mine, Simon East, and it was a very menial role there. But what we did, Simon and I set up an academy there for players that were being released at pro clubs to come in, be educated. They'll play as what was then Slough's youth team. And we try and regenerate them back into the game. And we managed to get 2 or 3 back into the game through that. But as that couple of years was panning out, I got a phone call from PFA asking me if I would be interested in one of their regional coaches' jobs. So I said yes, as you do. I drive up to Manchester or go up to Manchester by train to go to an interview, and I'm sitting in the office and Brian Talbot walks in, and so does Graham Taylor at the same Gordon Taylor at the same time. And Gordon says to Brian, oh, I'm glad Carol managed to get hold of you yesterday to come up for the interview. So I'm thinking to myself, well, I'm here for cannon fodder, as you do, because Brian was was a big part of the PFA at the time. He was the chairman of the PFA, etc., etc.
Right. So
Brian did get the job. But about a month, 6 weeks later, he got the job at Rushton Diamonds, and then I got a phone call again.
I remember.
Would you be interested still? So yes. I then went to the PFA. I was there for 9 years as one of their regional coaches, hence where we met at Peterborough, as Peterborough was one of my clubs that I looked after. And then from there, joined the FA and spent 13 years at the FA as in various roles within the FA, but working my way to a situation where I was leading on the A licence towards the end of my time there. But It's been a long journey, Steve, I can assure you. But you know, when you think that I left school at 15 and joined West Ham as a 15-year-old, 50 years later, the game's still giving me a buzz and still giving me a living, and you can't complain.
Brilliant, great story. Thanks, Geoff. Brilliant. Just explain what's going to happen today. We're very keen, Geoff and I, to make this as interactive as possible. So we're going to look at 4 kind of topics if we get through all 4. And I've got a couple of questions for each, but we're really looking for you guys and gals to type into the chat box, and Libby will try and monitor that and get your questions to Geoff. Just create some kind of discussion as best you can on a webinar. So let me just. The first thing we're going to look at is systems of play. So, you know, your goalie 4-4-2, goalie this, that, you know, goalie 5-4-1, etc. So I'm going to fire a couple of questions at you, Geoff, is that all right? And then, like I said, if anyone wants to chuck some questions in, we'll go from there.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess I'm talking to you on the phone last week. It's obvious that you're still a real student of the game, and you watch a lot of football still. Like you said, the game still gives you a buzz. What would you suggest is in vogue at the moment at the top level in terms of systems of play?
If I'm honest, I think that there's still, you know, a lot of teams at this moment in time will still play in a 4-3-3 system because they feel it's an appropriate system to play, and you know, it enables lots of different things to happen and players to rotate their positions, etc., etc. There's some teams now at the moment that are looking and attempting to play in a 3-5-2 system, which turns sometimes into a 5 at the back. So if I take West Ham, my old team, as an example, they're very much based. Their play very much at the moment seems to be based on, we'll defend deep and then we'll try and counter attack, but we'll base our game on the defensive aspects of the game and not concede. So if we only score 1 goal, we win the game. Yeah. So you know, in reality, the system of play is whatever it is. You know, so it's how you want to deploy those players and how you want to deploy your players in the most appropriate way based around the philosophy that you want to achieve. And, you know, so if you want to drop deep, defend deep and counter attack, as an example, then your system of players got to reflect that. Mm. If you want to play through the thirds, then your system of play needs to reflect that. So, you know, a lot of teams are playing with either 1 or 2 now defensive midfield players. So you either create a triangle with 2 and 1, or 1 and 2. Now, you know, so for me, if you're playing 2, then your whole thing is based around defensive aspects of the game. If you're playing 1, then it's the opposite way round. But you know,
on that, Geoff,
there was a thing a few weeks ago, not a few weeks, a few years ago. I was talking with Martin Thomas. Mm-hmm. At the FA. Tomo's a good mate of mine, and we sat there and we was chewing the fat and we was chatting away, and it was the first time I'd heard it, and it's going back a few years now. And he went, "Well, it's either over, around, or through, isn't it?" So I went, "Go on, what do you mean?" So he said, "Well, you either play the ball over the top of the defence, you play it around the defence, down the sides, or you play it through the defence." And it was something that sort of, you know, and I'm going back a few years now, but it was one of those things, it was like a light bulb moment to a degree. Even though we was doing it, it just made it so simple to be able to do that, you know, and people get hung up on, you know, well, we're going to play from the back. Yeah, but what is playing from the back? You can play from the back by playing a long pass into space for a player to run onto, or into feet into a player who's free, you know, so... You know, but it goes back to Charlie Hughes many years ago, you know, when he produced that book, The Winning Formula. You know, he produced a book and said, well, if you get the ball forward in under so many seconds, you've got more chance of scoring. Well, why? Well, because the opposition's all over the place. That's why. And you're doing it quicker. You know, but everybody took it the wrong way and said, well, we're going to bash it forward and get after it.
Geoff, I think I'd like to think Libby would be sitting there thinking, hang on a minute, I've heard of that over, through, or around. And so, I think I've bored the tears out of the teams I work with that one, because it really does keep it simple for me. I must say, Geoff, I've forgotten that's where I got who I got it from, but I need the game simplified. I'm not bright enough to take on all this. So it is, for me, it's that simple. I'm working with a group at the moment, a ladies team, and that was where we started, mate. First session, that's exactly the starting point. We have to go over if it's on, through, or around.
Yeah.
Thanks for that. Geoff, sticking on systems, do you think you've mentioned 4-3-3, you've mentioned 3-5-2. Do you think it's possible now in the modern game to play with a midfield too? Or do you think it has to be three in there just because of the nature of it?
I think now, I mean, I was watching West Ham the other day, funnily enough, against Liverpool, and they got absolutely played off the park. They never got a kick of the ball. But in reality, they still had a chance of getting into the game and getting something from the game once they had possession of the ball. But in reality, if you haven't got it, then you can't do anything with it. You know, so if the opposition have got the ball all the time, then you're going to struggle, whatever happens. So you might be lucky, you might get the ball back, you might do something out of the ordinary and score a goal. But if you haven't got the ball, then you can't do anything with it. You know, so if the way they played with like a diamond in midfield, Liverpool, and they were just passing the ball around as if for fun, it would look like a training game for them. You know, and they ended up winning the game 3. But you know, and one of the goals was just phenomenal. The way they just passed the ball through West Ham, it was like a hot knife through butter. You know, which was disappointing from my perspective, because I'm watching it because being a West Ham fan. But but watching Liverpool and the way they played through, you know, and is phenomenal. But you teams get hung up, and people get hung up with also the rules of the game. So now the goalkeeper can take a goal kick and pass it to someone inside the penalty area. Oh, we've got to do that because that's fashionable. Why? You know, is it just because it's fashionable that we can do that? You know, in reality, I'm looking at it going, well, you're putting the ball at risk so much by doing that. What's the point? You know, so let's play. Yeah, I'm happy to play. I mean, if I go back to the philosophy at West Ham was, and people said to me, well, it's about playing football. What do you mean by playing football? Well, passing the ball. No, I said the one instruction that was ever given to me when I was at West Ham was hit the furthest player forward with quality to feet and get quick support. That was all we was told. So when you think about it, that's really what the whole game is about. You know, it's about moving the ball quickly so you unsettle the opposition with quality and get support around the ball to be able to make sure that that ball is kept moving quickly so that it keeps the opposition all over the place. Now, tell me what system of play that is.
Yeah. Well, regardless of the system, it's a style, isn't it? As you say, yeah.
Well, to a degree. To a degree.
Talking about watching Liverpool, you would have played against the Liverpool teams in the 80s. I mean, they had a certain style, did they? Or were they similar? Would they play long? Would they play into the front player?
Well, I'll tell you the interesting thing. There was a thing that came out a few years ago. Phil Neal, who used to play right back at Liverpool, he came out with a quote and said, what we used to do at Liverpool for the first 15 minutes is hit the back of the defence. Why did they do that? Well, if they keep going behind us and Ian Rush keeps running onto it, then hang on a minute, we're going to drop off a bit deeper. And then what happens then? It creates space in front of them. And that's when they started to play there. And Souness and people like that started to get involved in the game and, you know, all that sort of stuff. So they were clever enough to do that, but they also had the players that they could do that, which comes down to what we're talking about here, which is systems of play. Is it about playing a system and based around the philosophy that you want to play? Or is it about whether the players are capable of playing in that system and capable of playing in that philosophy? That's the challenge.
Yeah, it's interesting. So if you were to go into, if a manager goes into a club, bearing in mind that I think it's something like 1 year and 2 months is the average kind of tenure of a manager now, would you suggest then you go in and have to adapt your style and system to the players you got? Or do you go in and say, right, now this is how we're going to play you lot?
Well, I'm fortunate enough to be friends with Mark Warburton. Right. Mark's a classic case. He goes up to Scotland for an interview for the job up there, which he gets and does very well while he's up there, by the way. But he had a dossier when he went up for the interview, and they said, okay, so what do you want to do? And he said, well, look, this is what this player's capable of doing. This is what this player's capable of doing. Or went right through all the players and said, these are what the players are capable of doing. As a consequence of that, I'd like to play in this style of play with this system of play. And I think that this is what we'll get the best out of. Words to that effect. Goes up there, gets the job, he's done a huge amount of research around, the only real game that matters up there is Celtic versus Rangers. So if you don't win that game, then you might as well forget it anyway. Which is what Steven Gerrard's doing at the moment. He's doing fantastically well up there, because he's gone up there and but they're now flying with the league. They're miles ahead, on the league. So, he's done really, really well up there, but he understands that process as well. And when he was doing his pro license at the FA, we had a conversation about it, and he understood everything and the culture and the whole thing around, the Rangers Celtic thing. And everything, so they were the only two. That's the only game they need to win up there for Rangers is Celtic, So, but when Mark went up there, he really nailed it down. And when he sat into the interview, he told me, he said, I told them exactly what each player was capable of doing.
Right. And
as a consequence of that, this is how we're going to play. So he sold it to them massively by that and did very well. Now, there's other managers that have gone into a club with a specific philosophy that they want to play the game by and have failed miserably because they've stuck to the philosophy and the system, but the players aren't capable of doing it.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think of youth development, Geoff, which is obviously what my career has been based on so far. Do you think we've fallen into that trap of the kids have got to play out, they've got to play short, they've got from the keeper? Do you think we've fallen into that, or do you think that's the way we should be educating coaches to educate kids?
I think that when you're educating kids, it's about understanding how to control the ball and how to pass it and how to edit. So the basic techniques, really. I went to a club, sadly, as you know, one of our colleagues when we was at the FA, John Gittins, sadly passed away. And as a consequence of that, I took on a couple of clubs that he was looking after at the time. And I went to this specific club one evening to watch the academy work. And one of the coaches was working with, in a small area, I'll give him his due, he's only got a small area on the pitch, which a lot of academies are now have that issue. They've only got a quarter of a pitch or a half a pitch to work in. And he was doing this playing out from the back with a goalkeeper from the goalkeeper's possession in a small area. And I said to him, why are you doing that? He said, well, we didn't do this very well on Saturday. So he's working with the under 11s, under 12s. And he's like now trying to teach them to play out from the back in an area that isn't appropriate, but they've got no reference point because they're on the side of the pitch and the goalkeeper's got, so where's the goal? Where's the penalty area? Where's this, that and the other? But the goalkeeper kept passing the ball out of play. So I said to him, why aren't you working on the goalkeeper's passing ability rather than trying to get them to play out from the back? Because that might be a fundamental aspect that you need to work on to be able to achieve what you want to achieve. But it's a building block process.
Yeah.
It's a bit like, I mean, you know, and there's been a lot of parents that know that at this moment in time, during the current situation that we're in, there's a lot of homeschooling going on. And I've volunteered my services to 3 of my grandchildren, and I have one on a Monday, one on a Wednesday, and one on a Thursday. And they're all from the same family. So to try and do 3 of them, which I had to do yesterday, which is an absolute nightmare. But to do one of them, she's Amelia, she's 6 years old. So I'm not trying to teach her algebra. I'm trying to get her to understand how many minutes there are in an hour.
Right.
So if you can relate that,
basics.
Let's go back to that.
Yeah.
Teach the kids how to control the ball, how to edit ball, how to head the ball, how to pass the ball, how to support the play. So when you pass it there, just move there. So you've got to give him some help or her. then you know we've got more of a chance. But we've gone to the extreme of saying, well, we've got to do this and we've got to do that because this is what we're doing. This is how it's working. No, you can't do that without having the basics in the first place.
That's so good. And Geoff, you've answered quite a few questions there, because someone's been saying, you know, do we overcoach? Do we have too much detail? And like you just said there, like, yes, keeping it simple and stuff is the way forward, right?
Well, Lib, you know, you got the situation here where, I mean, Steve knows because we did a lot of work around learning at the FA through the qualifications and how people learn, etc., etc. And we know that people learn differently, without no question of a doubt. But what we don't do, so yesterday, for example, I've got Isabella who's 10 and I've got Oliver who's 9. Now, Oliver's really good at maths. So I sat him down in the kitchen around my house and I said, right, Oliver, you're going to teach Isabella how to do the maths. And I tell you what, the how he worked was incredible because, you know, he was explaining it to her. He was saying, you know, showing her, you know, all those types of things, you know, and people go, well, you know, they've got to learn on their own. Well, no, they haven't got to learn on their own. Sometimes they've got a copy to start with. You know, so you might have to show them how to pass the ball with the inside of the foot, where the standing foot might be, what part of the ball you might need to make contact on to be able to pass the ball successfully. But we don't go down that route anymore. We say, oh, you know, it's, you know, we've got to go down these different routes, you know, because of all these different learning theories, etc., etc. Well, hold on a minute. You know, there is. Steve, I'll ask you a question now. How did you learn to play football initially as a kid?
I learned 2 ways. I learned in my back garden against the wall,
yeah,
and I learned over the field with older kids and
absolutely,
mates.
Absolutely. So my parents lived on the end terrace house, so we had a big wall, and I used to drive my mum up the wall, literally, by just kicking the ball up against the wall. But I then went to West Ham as an apprentice, and John Lyle, who was the manager, first team manager when I was playing in the first team, was a youth team coach at the time, and he got us under the West Stand at Upton Park one day with a ball each. Alan Kirbishley was in the group as well, if you remember Alan.
Yeah.
And he asked us to kick the ball up against the wall. So he's got about a dozen of us or whatever the number was, and we're kicking the ball up against the wall. And everybody's kicking the ball along the floor up against the wall. And I got fed up with it. So did Curbs, to be fair. So we started to lift the ball up against the wall and control it in a different way. Did John tell us not to do that? Absolutely not. But out of that whole group, me and Alan were the only two that became apprentice professional, played in their first team. So we were given the license to be able to develop it ourselves once we knew what we could do. But we couldn't develop it without having the basic to start with.
So with that in mind, would you suggest then for coaches on the call who are working with young players, do you think coaching is more a case of just providing with the environment and the opportunity and more?
The environment's crucial.
Right.
Providing the right environment is crucial. There needs to be some fundamental instruction. So I'm sitting there with Amelia the other day and I've drawn a circle for a clock and we've drawn 12 at the top, 6 at the bottom, 3 on the right, 9 on the left, filled in the numbers around the outside. And then went, okay, so where number 1 is, that's 5 minutes. Where number 2 is, that's 10 minutes. And went round the clock again and put all the minutes on. And then said, right, okay, put me two lines now where the hands are that says it's 10 past 6 or something like that. And she could do it because she understood it, because the numbers were there for her to reference. But if you don't have a reference point, you've got nothing to fall back to. So when you talk about, so a reference point might be, well, when you pass the ball from A to B and you're going over that 10-yard period, pass it with the inside of your foot. That's a reference point, because if you kick it with the laces, you're probably going to not be very accurate and you might kick it too hard and it might not be the right pace, etc., etc. You know, so you have to teach the fundamentals to start with. I can remember I did my coaching qualifications, Steve, and ended up playing in some charity games when I'd finished playing.
Yeah.
And I did my coaching qualifications and I'm playing in central midfield at a charity game over at Thurrock. And it's an ex-West Ham team. Billy Bonds was playing, etc., etc. And I'm playing in midfield and the opposition have got the ball and I'm going to myself, what am I doing here? I'm in the wrong place. I need to be over there. because the coaching qualification gave me that insight into those types of things. And I wished I'd been able to do those qualifications while I was still playing the game, because I think it would have fundamentally helped me as a player.
Do you know, Geoff, Chris Morris, his ex-colleague of ours who played, Chris is brilliant. He's played the World Cup and the Euros, so he didn't do too bad for himself.
No.
He plays a right back, and he said the same. He said, I've learned more about the game since joining the FA and being a coach educator than I did when I played in the World Cup. He said, I knew how to play right back, but I didn't know anything else. So that's really interesting. And just on something you said a second ago, another colleague, Dave Stevens, something he says, I love. He says, why make a game of chess out of a game of drafts? Keep it simple, that kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's some questions, Libby, I think, aren't there, in the chat box?
Yeah, there's one about systems, which we'll go to. We mentioned it a little bit before people joined on about the positions, but this is more about would you encourage to develop in terms of the youth to try as many systems as possible and challenge the players that way, or to stick with the system that suits the players that you have available?
That's a challenge, Libby, if I'm honest, because we could in reality contradict what we've just been talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
But as a youth team coach at Orient, I went in on a Monday morning and said to Frank Clark, I want to play with a back three next week. And he said, why? I said, because I feel like I need to give the players an overall education of the game. We've been playing with a back four for half a season. What I fundamentally think is that at some point there has to be some education around the different systems of play, but you don't change it every week. You work on it for a period of time so they understand what's required from that system. My job as a youth team coach, I felt, was to produce players for the game, not produce players for Leyton Orient. Whilst that's part of the parcel, the parcel is that ultimately what we want them to be able to do is to earn a living out the game. So if my right back doesn't understand how to play as an advanced right back in a different system of play, then I felt fundamentally I was failing him not to be able to give him that information. But I'm not going to go 1 week you're playing as a right back in a four, and then the next week you're playing as a right wing back in a five, or you're playing as actually what I think what would be really good is if you played as a right-sided centre back in the three. Whoa, hold on a minute. There's too much information. There has to be some sort of element of control around the development of those particular players. So if my right back hasn't got an understanding of how to play in a back four as a right back, then I can't go to the next stage and say, I want you to play as a right wing back, because he doesn't understand the fundamental system initially. So you've got to go through those stages. So so you teach the kids how to add up and take away and divide before you go to algebra. You don't go to algebra first.
Great analogy.
There's one, Graham Fletcher. What would be the starting point for you as a new manager or coach? So your introduction chat, if you like.
Well, it depends on who you're working with. If you're working with a group on Sunday morning, it's what do you want to do? Do you want to enjoy it? Yeah, brilliant, fantastic, because that's really what Sunday morning football for me is about, is the enjoyment and the physical exercise that the kids are going to be able to get from it. It's not about winning the game, it's about the enjoyment of it. If you're working with players that are in a professional environment, then young players, what's their ultimate gain? Well, I want to be a pro. If you're working with the apprentices, if you're working in the academies, then I want to be as a academy player. All those types. It's building those stages that's appropriate for that particular individual. There was a what is it? I can't remember what I called it now, but it's like an animation type thing around learning, by a fellow called Sir Ken Robinson, and he
Right.
talks about the fundamentals of learning in schools environments, and it's worth having a look at. I can't. It's like an animation type thing, and that they draw it, and
I think I know what you mean.
talks over
Yeah,
it,
yeah. I don't know what they're called.
and it's fascinating when you think about so because the educational system in this country reflects what people do from a football perspective. So it links because you know, as a coach, you're an educator.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
you're teaching your players. You're a teacher. You're teaching your players to be better players. But if you don't understand the fundamentals of learning, then you can't teach the players whatever you want to teach them. It don't work.
Sure, somebody will know what we're trying to describe, and we'll put it in the chat. I know what you mean. It's when they draw it, and it's fascinating.
Yeah, it's something animation or something like
Right.
that. I can't remember what it's called now.
Libby, do you mind if I ask one of the questions on behalf of someone? Because I'm assuming it's the Billy Russell I know, who's I worked with briefly as a young player, who's a wonderful little footballer. Billy's asked, is football a technique-based sport or a decision-making sport? That's a tough one for a Saturday morning, definite.
Well, I made a decision to come on this webinar, Steve. I'm not sure whether it was the right decision by the looks of it after that question.
A good one, isn't it?
Just repeat it again for me. So
is football a technique-based sport or a decision-making sport?
Right. Okay. I've just seen a message come up from Gary.
Really?
Libs RSA Animate. It's
There you
called.
go. Thanks,
Yeah.
guys.
So decision making or
decision making. I like how you gave yourself a bit of thinking time there, Geoff. Decision making sport or a technique based sport?
Right. Okay. So we'll address it in this way. So one of the questions I used to ask coaches was about the situation when you're going to release players at the end of the year. So in academies, for example. So people used to say to me, as you know, so they're working with the 10s, 11 years of age, 12 years of age, something along those lines. So what's the rationale behind whether you're keeping or whether you're releasing that player? Well, generally, the question that came back was they're not very good at making decisions. They're not very good decision makers. So my answer to that was, well, do you understand how the brain works then? And I know Sally probably did a lot of this recently as well around the brain. But when you think about it, the kids at sort of 8, 9, 10 years of age, 11 years of age, the part of their brain that makes those decisions doesn't work properly. They can make a decision, but they can't make an informed decision based around the current situation that they're in. But players were being released because of those decision-making aspects. Right. As they then get older, and one of the things, you know, Josh Brooks, who we worked with at the FA, the psychologist.
Yeah.
I was talking to her a while back now, and we did a CPD event up at Newcastle, and we was talking about players and you know, so on and so forth. And she said to me, when do players get to their peak? So I said, well, usually around 25, 26, 27 years of age, around that age. She said, well, do you not really, it's fundamental that the brain doesn't fully develop until you're 26, 27 years of age.
Right.
So why are players now becoming the best that they can be around that age group? Well, it's got to have something to do with the brain.
Yeah.
You know, but what we do is we go and make these choices and decisions around these players, not based on their technique and their technical ability. We base it on the fact that they can't make a decision. But actually, we don't know why they can't make that decision. Yeah, because they don't know that. You know, it's madness. It just, you know, so the challenge is that you take on, from an academy perspective in the professional clubs, you take on less players and you work with less players, but you keep them longer. Rather than go, well, I'm going to take all these, I'm going to take all these kids here and then release half of them at the end of the year. There was a guy called Pete Sadderby who used to work for Spurs in the academy. He was academy manager when I was working at the PFA. And I went in one day and he said, I've got to tell you this story. I said, go on then. He said, I was out last night having some dinner with my wife. It was only like a harvester or something like that. And he said, my wife was talking to me and I totally blanked her. He said, I didn't have a clue what she was talking about because I was listening to the table behind me. And there was mum, dad, a little lad sitting on the table, and nan and granddad. And the nan said to the mum, well, you know, what you said we're coming out to celebrate. Why are we celebrating? So the mum said, well, it's a little Johnny, for example, 9 years of age, this boy. She said, oh, we're coming out to celebrate because little Johnny's joined Brentford in the academy. But we know he's got such a long way to go before he gets in the first team. That was the mum saying to the nan what she expected of the child.
Right. Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
we know, Steve, as I'm sure a lot of people do know, that over 90% of those kids that go in there at the start of the season have gone by the end of the year. You know, so the reality of that is phenomenal. But going back to the question, yes, they need to understand the technique, absolutely. But the decision-making aspects are crucial, but don't think that they can make those decisions until they get a little bit older. So work on the technique.
Yeah, well answered as well. Great question, Billy. Thanks, Geoff. We, as expected, and this is how I wanted to go. We had some slides, Geoff and I, we put together to prompt discussions, but we've gone all over the place. But it's good. It's relevant. I love it. Keep firing questions in. Those who are with us today. I want to talk a little.
It's only 4-4-2 anyway, Steve.
Yeah, go on, Geoff. Tell us.
It's only 4-4-2.
Do you want to elaborate on that?
Yeah, we had the depending on where it's based around the deployment of the players. So every system, in my opinion, and you know we can argue about this, and there will be lots of arguments about this or discussions around it. Every system is based on 4-4-2. It's just how you deploy the players. So you can maneuver the players around. So for example, if you play 4-diamond-2, you're playing 4-4-2, but they're in the shape of a diamond. They're not flat across the pitch. Yeah. So if you're playing 4-3-3, you might play an advanced one on the left-hand side or an advanced one on the right-hand side. So I've got Libby Piggott, who bombs on for me down the right-hand side. So I'm going to let her do that. But actually, she's playing more forward, but she's a right-sided midfield player.
This is why, Rich, this is why I had it on this morning, because I want to move them around a bit. That was the plan. So I'm sorry it was minimised. Go on, as you talk, keep talking, Geoff. I'm going to try and do the Jamie Carragher bit. Not as whizzy, is it?
No.
Geoff, it's interesting.
So if you, okay, look, get the number 10 and drop him a little bit deeper.
I've been on my A license again and boxed about.
Drop him a little bit deeper.
Is that all right?
That's it. Lovely. Thank you. Right. 4-4-2, not 4-4-1-1. 4-4-2.
Well, the argument, I guess, Geoff, would be, well, hang on a minute, people. I won't do this in terms of how the numbers look, but teams are setting up like so, aren't they now?
Yeah.
With the back three.
Let me give you a prime example of this.
Okay.
So the Brazilian team, when Roberto Carlos and Cafu were the two fullbacks. Yeah. I had a conversation with Mark Venus down at Ipswich when he was in the first team, and he said to me, I said to him, what system of play do Brazil play? And he went, well, they play this system, and I can't remember what it was. I said, no, they play 4-4-2. But what they do is the two fullbacks push on. So as soon as they get in possession, they pushed on. Yeah. Roberto Carlos and Cafu bombed on, and one of their centre back, one of the wide midfield players dropped. Wide midfield player dropped into midfield. One of the defensive midfield players dropped into the back four.
Right.
So it was just a manoeuvre of the players. It wasn't, but fundamentally they started out as 4-4-2. Right. But there was such a fluid movement that they changed it all around.
But is that, Geoff, would you suggest, in order to do that, they were able to do that because they kept possession of the ball for long periods? Would you suggest?
Potentially.
Because
potentially.
I always think...
But they did have very good players, by the way, Steve.
Oh, I know they did, yeah, absolutely. And that's what I mean. If teams can keep possession of the ball for longish periods, it gives them surely the time to come off the shape and create, you know. Whereas if the transitions every... Sorry.
Drop the number 4 a little bit deeper and put the 8 and the 10. That's it. No, too deep now. little bit in front. That's it. Put the 8 and the 10 close together. 4-4-2. There you are. Just
Right,
deployed in a different way.
yeah, yeah.
So you can have some fun with this.
Yeah.
So people can go, no, they don't. But as I explained before we started today,
Yeah.
I did this with a Subbuteo table on an A license once, and it was fascinating the way the guys were working on it, and they were trying so hard to find a system that I couldn't maneuver.
That's what I'm
back
doing
into
now.
4-4-2. But in reality, and one of the things that we said right at the very start of this conversation, before anybody had joined us, was it's not about the system of play. It's about whether the players are capable and that have the ability to be able to play in any system of play that you require them to play in.
Do you
Like
think?
challenge accepted now? If anybody can challenge
Yeah.
Geoff, then do let us know. We'll get you on.
And Geoff, what about in terms of having a system in possession, but then having a system out of possession? Would you suggest teams do that?
A lot of teams do that. I can remember watching when Joe Cole was playing, and he was at West Ham as a youngster. I went and watched him playing an FA Cup at Manchester United, and he played as the number 10, for example, or as a second striker for whatever reason. But as soon as West Ham lost possession, he dropped back in and made a 5 in midfield.
Right.
And as a consequence of that, they caused Manchester United some real problems.
Right.
But in reality, it's still 4-4-2. It's just the deployment of the players in a certain way. So you're playing that way when you've got it, and you're playing that way when you haven't got it. But it's still 4-4-2, because if you lined them up right at the very start, so when you put the tactic board up right at the very start, okay, this is what you're going to do.
Yeah.
So you're going to set up and you're going to play 4-4-2. Now, when that person does that, you do that, you do that, you do that, etc., etc. So it's what is a system of play? Is it just a framework to work by? Absolutely. So all it is having a current framework that the players understand that you can be flexible around. So you can't build a house without putting scaffold up. But you got to have the scaffolding to start with. And the scaffolding is your 4-4-2 or your system of play.
Love it. Just want to get back into here. Libs, I'm going to ask Billy's question because he's on fire. Billy's on fire today. There's another good one, Geoff. What are your thoughts on Bielsa's Leeds team or Bielsa's approach to football?
Well, I haven't seen a great deal of them, I must admit. So it's very difficult to comment on something that you haven't seen a lot of. I've heard he's very good at hiding in bushes and getting information from opposition teams. But apart from that, I wouldn't like to really comment because I haven't seen enough of them. I know that they want to try and play, or do they? It's the same, isn't it? The tactics and the tactics and strategies that you use within the game are based around the abilities and the capabilities of your team. So there was a guy called Alan Booler. So Alan I supported on his pro license. He was manager of the Gibraltar national team when they first got accreditation by UEFA. And he and this again is a question to everybody. He said I did a CPD event out in Gibraltar a few years back, and he was a manager at the time, and he said we work in 15-minute blocks. So I said, well, what do you mean? Explain what you mean. He said, well, we've got some strategy that we use for the first 15 minutes. And then when we get to 15 minutes, we change the strategy to this, and then again to the next strategy, and again. So we work on a 15-minute block. So I said, well, what happens if you're losing 1-0 or winning 1-0? Does the strategy change? So that's the question to all the guys that are listening. Would you consider working in 15-minute blocks like that and have a strategy? Or is it too rigid? Or is it flexible enough that the players can be flexible enough around those 15-minute blocks of work? But he suggested that from a Gibraltar perspective, because they're one of the lesser nations in Europe, that they had to work in those 15-minute blocks to have any chance of getting any type of result. I personally said, well, I'm not sure about that. You know, because how can you do that? Because there's so many different variabilities around it. So you could be 1-0 up, you could be 2-0 up, you could be 3-0 up after 15 minutes, or vice versa. So, you know, do you go automatically go to the next strategy for the next 15 minutes, irrelevant to the score? Well, I don't think you can work like that.
The
It'd
nearest,
be interesting to hear what everybody thinks.
yeah, the nearest I've heard to that, Geoff, and I still use it a bit, and I sometimes think, should I be saying this? Because especially I was working for the FA. It was the old first 10 minutes, just get the ball in behind the opposition, get them facing their own goal. And the reason being, from what you said about the Liverpool team, is get them pushed back. You know, don't let them score, but also try and get their back line further away. And I sometimes think, when I'm saying it to players, and Libby's probably heard me say it, you know, am I outdated, or is for the first 10, why not?
Well, I mean, the proof of the pudding, isn't it? Really, I mean, you know, Liverpool in their heyday when they were doing that type of thing were winning everything. So, you know, but the game was slightly different then. Whereas now it's. I would argue that you could probably still do the same thing, and push the opposition back towards their own goal. So I don't know, you know, but people at the moment are fixated on this. Well, we've got to play out from the back and we've got to play through, you know, and you know, I watched, as I say, the West Ham Liverpool game last week. Liverpool were playing from the back, and they were unchallenged after time. They weren't getting pressed in any way. They weren't getting pressed aggressively from West Ham. So there was a real problem. When it changed round, West Ham are trying to play out from the back. We're having limited possession and getting absolutely hounded by Liverpool. You know, so, you know, what would you do? I mean, if you knew that a fella called John Cartwright. Do you remember John Cartwright?
Yeah.
John, when I was youth coach at Orient, he was youth coach at Charlton. And he brought a youth team over from Charlton, and whilst people John Cartwright's a love or hate situation.
Yeah.
You know, you either love him or you hate him, and but he had the fundamental. You know, in them days, we're talking, you know, sort of late. Where are we? Early 90s now. He had the wherewithal to go with this, and he said, "Right, I want you to play from the back from Charlton perspective, from the kids," and he absolutely hounded them on the Saturday morning over at Douglas Air Sports Centre. I remember it like it was yesterday. He got his goalkeeper, because he wanted them to play from the back, to give the ball to his left back, who was standing next to him 3 yards out from the goal line in the 6-yard box. So whilst John took everything to extreme, his idea was way in advance of where people are, you know, where we are now. You know, so, but once I'd recognised that that's what they were going to do, I said to my players, well, look, as soon as they start playing from back, go and press them early.
Yeah.
You know, try and get the ball back. And we actually ended up winning the game. You know, so, you know, I could have said, well, go and do that. And they could have gone, bomb, play through and beat it like nobody's business. And I'm then, you know, struggling to get my players to buy into what I'm asking them to do.
Yeah. Libs, I think I've seen the chat box on fire. So do you want to fire some up, Geoff?
Yeah, there's a few going back to the 4-4-2 stuff.
I thought there would be.
A few challenges / questions, really. So with the Sheffield United system, is that a 4-4-2 or a 3-5-2?
4-4-2.
I knew it. I knew it. I might as well have written that in. Guys, any of those questions, the answer is 4-4-2.
Right. I'm being very flippant, Libs, because, you know, people do, and you can, but you can say, well, look, you know, it's 4-4-2 or it's 3-5-2 or it's, you know, 4-4-1-1 or it's, you know, 4-3-3, whatever system you're talking about. In reality, it's about putting 11 players on the field, putting them in a position that they are capable and able of being able to play in, to be able to work with the philosophy that you are asking them to play with, i.e. whether it's playing out from the back. Then if the players can do that, and you can get them to play the way you want them to play, playing in the system that you want them to play, Don't matter whether it's 4-4-2, 3-5-2, 4-3-3, whatever.
Great stuff. This question, can you ask Geoff about the modern trends in the game around defending, i.e. teams like Liverpool defending with a really high line and defenders being left 1v1 at the back with no cover?
Well, that's interesting, Libby, because, you know, one of the things that as a coach, you would like to be able to do is to get your players to be able to defend 1v1. You know, because there's a lot of defenders out there that really struggle to defend 1v1. You know, so, you know, it goes back to what we was talking about around basics. You know, so if you're asking the players to be able to maintain possession by being able to pass it from A to B, when they're out of possession, one of the basics is, well, defending 1v1. You know, be good at it. You know, and if you're comfortable with defending 1v1, then why not? You know, because defending 1v1 half the time, or probably 90% of the time, is being able to make the right decision whether to go to the ball or whether to drop off at that particular time, whether to let the player have possession of the ball or to try and win the ball, whether to try and intercept it or whether to try and just get tight and stop them from turning. You know, so, you know, there's lots of variabilities within it. You know, so you can't actually say, well, I want them to do this, because unless the players, and it goes back to what I just said, whatever system you're playing in, whether you're in or out possession, your players need to be able and capable of doing what you're asking them to do. I don't know if that answers the question, or whether I've been like a politician there and sort of ducked around it.
No, absolutely. Guys, there's so many questions. Thanks for pinging them all in. There's a good one in terms of like practical, when you're out coaching. Are you a fan of practicing and implementing regimented patterns of play, or just allow players to go and think for themselves?
This goes back to what we were just talking about with systems of play, Libs, is you design your system and your system becomes your framework. As a consequence of that, and you have a framework that you can work by, then you've got the opportunity to do what you're just asking whether it's possible to do or not. If you haven't got the framework to start with, then how can you do that? So, and I'll go back to the analogy of building a house. Okay, so we can build the first bit, we can dig the foundations, and we can put the foundations in, and we start to build up to damp course level, and then we go up to first floor level. But I can't go any higher than that unless I've got scaffolding or the framework around it. So without building that framework and having the players understand what the framework looks like in and out of possession and on transition, then you can't go anywhere else with it. So I don't know if that answers the question or not.
Yeah. So,
It really does. God, there's loads here, Steve. If you can see any.
yeah, it's picking out. Oh God, it's so difficult, isn't it? You'll have to come on again, my man.
Yeah. There's a lot of stuff going on here. There's one which we discussed before people came on, actually, Geoff, about do you have examples of players who have started in a certain position and then over time changed and adapted to another position as their knowledge has increased and they have matured as players? We were discussing this before you guys came on. Yeah. So here we go.
Absolutely, and I'll use myself as an example, Libby. I went to West Ham as a 15-year-old as an apprentice. What was then an apprentice. I went to Ipswich just prior to that on trial, and I played up there. I had a week's trial up in Ipswich as a 15-year-old, and so Bobby Robson, who was the manager at the time, came to me at the end of the week's trial and he said, I want to sign you on apprentice and you'll be in my first team within 18 months. Oh, whoa, hold on. But I'm at West Ham. Right, okay. He rang me 4 times the following week to find out whether I'd heard from West Ham or not. After about the 3rd time of the phone call from Bobby Robson, I picked the phone up and rang a fella called Wally St Pierre, who was the chief scout at West Ham. And I said, Wally, what's happening? Am I going to get signed on or not? And he said, well, I don't know yet. I said, well, if you're not going to tell me yes or no, because if not, I'm going to Ipswich. I'll come back to you. 5 minutes later, the phone rang, we're signing you. So it just works how it works. But I went there as a centre forward. I'm 5 foot nothing, but I went there as a centre forward because I score goals for fun. I played as a right-sided midfield player in an FA Cup final. I played most of my career as a central midfield player. I played at right back in the first team, and I played at centre forward in the first team at West Ham. So I don't know if that answers the question or not, but yes, I think there is I didn't find my right position, which was central midfield, until I tried several other positions that worked for me. So, and it was just a pure piece of luck that I ended up playing as most of my career as a central midfield player. We won the FA Cup in 1980, playing as a right-sided midfield player in the game. We started pre-season the following season, and Paul Allen, who was the youngest ever player at the time to play in an FA Cup final, got injured over at Charlton in a pre-season friendly. And I went on as a substitute and played central midfield. Paul wasn't available for the first game of the season, so I kept my position. And then I played every single game that season in central midfield. So it was pure luck that it happened in that way. But and in the end, I became that sort of an integral part of the team. At one point, I was even given the captaincy, which was fantastic.
Brilliant.
In terms of, I know we're running out of time, but in terms of like everyone here, what will probably be a coach of some sort, how does that then relate to them? If players aren't might not have a set position and then keep changing, what practice wise, how will that look as a coach?
Well, if you're working with young players, just let them go and play. Doesn't matter where. I mean, I've got a grandson who's 9 years old who thinks he's going to be a goalkeeper. We don't know that yet, because he's not playing competitively. He's not playing on a Sunday morning or anything like that. All he does is kick the ball around in the garden, but he thinks he's going to be a goalkeeper. But we don't know that yet. So allow the players to find those positions for themselves. You can't, when you get to a certain age group, then you can start to say, well, the abilities and the capabilities of those players. So physically, for example, or athletically, they can do this. So so they could potentially play in this position. So we'll give them a try. We don't know that yet. I was always very good. I could run for fun over distances. Stamina wise, I was fine, but quick, I wasn't very quick. So for me to play out wide was going to be a struggle for me because I was never quick enough to be able to do that. But to play central midfield worked because I didn't have to be that quick athletically, but I needed to think quickly, which I was quite good at. It's different types of things that will contribute to whether that player is playing in the right or wrong position. But just allow them to play. Just get them out there and just say, look, there's a ball, go and play.
Geoff, someone's phone.
Sorry, it's telephone going on.
Well, Geoff, we're over time. One quick question before we go. What formation did you play when you won the 1980 FA Cup final?
Well, that's an interesting one.
I thought I was going to get a swift reply then.
Well, it was, we started off in 4-4-2, but we was 4-4-2 system of play. But what we did, we had a guy called Stuart Pearson who came to us from Manchester United, and the manager decided before the game that he was going to drop Stuart Pearson to play as a deep line central striker, so number 10, for example, to cause Arsenal a problem.
Right.
And they, to be honest with you, they couldn't figure out how to pick him up. But that we're talking about, it was it's a long while ago, Steve.
Yeah. No, that's cool. Thanks, mate. Maybe before I pass up to Libby to wrap things up, Geoff, we had Paul Ashworth with us on last Saturday, and he's writing a book. I recommend that you write a book because you've got some great history there and some great stories. Thanks ever so much for coming on, Geoff. I really appreciate it.
It's been my pleasure, Steve. Hopefully the guys that have been on have got something from it and enjoyed it.
I'm sure they have.
Yeah, guys, thanks for coming. And we'll be sending out a recording and slides so you can come back to it and listen to Geoff again. That's all good.
That's a worry.
There's still some more webinars coming up, so it's not too late to join. So yeah, check those out. Check on the Instagram, Twitter, all of that sort of stuff, and you'll find out the information there. Great. Thanks for coming, guys. Enjoy your weekend, and I'll see you on the next one.
Thanks, guys. Thanks, Geoff.
No worries, mate.
I've got to jump on another meeting, Geoff. I'll give you a ring in a bit if that's all right.
Okay, no problem, mate.
Thanks.
Talk to you soon. Thanks, Liv.
Yeah.
Thank you. Bye.